Dear one, let me tell you a different story. The one that we have of the Buddha. I'm not saying this is history. I'm saying it's a story. But there's a great blessing in it. And I would avail you, that's a nice old-fashioned phrase, of it. I would avail you of it. The story is that, many variations on it, but that Buddha was born to a couple that had received a prophecy that he would either be a great king, their son, or a great spiritual, a saint, quite simply. His dad, being king, of course, wanted his son to be a great king, and thought in his heart, how best can I achieve this, because this is what I value. I don't want him to end up wasting his life as a saint. from the present king's point of view, you see. We would say in the modern sense he's secular, I suppose. And so he, presumably he and his wife, hopefully, devised a plan to keep his son in an environment where he never saw the evils of the world, and well, I suppose therefore not realise the great plight of life and the overwhelming need to trust in God with all one's heart, soul, mind and strength, but would be free to be what Dad felt was a great king and rule accordingly. So, well, to make a story short, they kept him from all hardship, seeing all misery and plight of life, cosseted in a palace where there was, well, he came across no illness, no aging and no death. He just didn't know it existed. Now, before you think this is a very tall story, think how we try to bring up kids. We keep them from the evil realities of what is in this world around us that we have come to have to reckon with. In the early years, and we protect them from the consequence of this chaos with all our heart. We give them fairy stories, it's true, but they don't seem reality. They seem like fairy stories, whether it's Red Riding Hood, or whether it's stories of great heroes, knights in shining armour and so on. But the child may grow and know goodness from the beginning, such that they are appalled when one night the son, still a youth really, breaks out with his servant, goes into the city, and he comes across the horrors of the reality that faces the poor and the suffering in this world. And he asks of his servant, well, what is this here? He says, it's illness, master. Pain and the deterioration of the body. And this, old age, master. But that's a terrible state. And what's that? It's a funeral, master. What are they doing? Well, anyway, you know what they're doing, don't you? And the Buddha is so shocked, this son who becomes the Buddha, that the whole horror of it, the contrast, plagues his mind. And he takes to a sadhu's nomadic life of meditation to try and get to grips with this appalling reality that seems to be everywhere, outside, beyond his palace. You see, the contrast is so great that he very blessedly turns to spirituality to try and cope with the tragedy that he's experiencing everywhere he looks. Dear one, we're still like that. Our eyes have been hidden from the appalling distress in our world, of lives that are not as privileged as our own. It's as if every square metre of land harbours the most appalling jungle of life. Plaguing each other, as if every creature walks in fear of what almost certainly will happen to it in the end. Not quite, because we hope desperately that they don't realise how bad their lot is. Compared to the great good fortune and cosseted care that we have had as what one might casually refer to as a higher form of life. Whoever had the notion that God said in the Garden of Eden, or thought that he looked upon it all and it was good, wasn't talking about an environment that we have turned, well, not deliberately, that we are so unaware of in our present world. I mean, just as a person to be free of the fear of wild beasts is an astonishing privilege in itself. To be able to sleep in our beds, so to speak, each night, with scarcely a thought of being attacked by one's fellow type of creature, or a more degenerate version of such, is just such an incredible advantage that we have. And if we were to open our eyes at the horrors that are about us in nature, and the horrors that we as a people impose upon the creatures of nature too, whether it's by the obvious like abattoirs, farming, or our never-ending building and carnage of the land and all that lives in it and under it. Well, the obvious, it doesn't bear thinking of. And as I've said, whatsoever is good and lovely, we should think on those things. And amazingly, even in the secular world, that's very nearly what we do. We are blind to the suffering of this planet and the suffering that we cause, not just to the poor and oppressed of our planet, but to every so-called inferior living thing as well. That's what we might say is the plain truth of the matter. It's not the fairyland of the Garden of Eden that we somehow hope for in the story of like Adam and Eve. And the fall is descriptively represented as these amazing souls, if you like simplistically, Adam and his wife, who fall into a state that doesn't reflect their privilege in this fairyland garden of all goodness. And they are cast out in the Buddha story. They escape into a realization of everything that's beyond it. I mean, quite simply, how appalling evil can be. And the contrast again is dramatic, isn't it? In the Christian or the Hebrew story. Let me pause. Let me say, first of all, that the king, in a bizarre way, achieved the essence of what he valued, namely the best for his son, which actually turned out to be that his son would become recognized in his culture as one of the most wonderful beings ever. But of course it was not the king's conception of wonderful, which was to be a great king, greater than himself. So he found that he we find, looking at it, he ultimately got what he truly valued, true greatness for his son, because his son, so shocked, of course, by what he saw, gave himself wholly to the spiritual quest of trying to understand suffering and how to avoid it. And really, Buddhism is that. It has no personified God as such, other than himself, really. And simply tries to cope with how can we avoid suffering. Suffering seemed endemic everywhere in everything the Buddha looked at. Even goodness turned into boredom and unrest, and longing for something else. So desire ultimately unmet and suffering was everywhere. And he resolved in his godliness, I think I would like to say, to find the answer that the whole universe of life could, in some sense, be emancipated, freed, rescued into a bliss where suffering did not exist. Of course, the Buddha sought it in the essence of being realm, which we might casually say is thought. I can't suffer from suffering except my mind is addressed to it and aware of it. And of course he'd not been aware of it in his childhood, as indeed the childhood is that we attempt to give our children, keep them from all evil. And so we learn the story that it is the exposure to evil that gives us this incredible motivation to understand it and overcome it. And that, in a nutshell, is what the spiritual quest is. And we understand from a Christian type perspective that God has given us opportunity beyond Eden, so to speak. Unless Eden was simply the appearance of what the world was, whereas the reality lay outside, beyond the appearance of the Eden garden. The thought of Eden compared to what it could otherwise be like. The mayhem of the wild, if you like, where no way a God could look upon it and say, it's all good. It would only all be good if you were the most appallingly evilly motivated. Well, that's as be. But to give you the same explanation, we are here as though on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms, despairing of the port, when we experience and are forced to see evil, suffering, harm, loss, compared to what we thought and assumed was the goodness of pure life. That in some sense we had been given the picture of in our childhood, because our parents keep us from the evil in those tender years. And it is this goodness that gives us opportunity to continue to form and develop and become a living soul in full that can appreciate, ultimately as an adult, the difference between good and evil, and resolve in the very depth of our being to ever pursue the good. As in his way, both Jesus did and the Buddha did in their respective stories. Stories they may be, but the truth that they bring home to us is heaven's rescue itself. That we need to be utterly resolved and devoted to all that is good and lovely, both for our own sake and for all life. I am come that you might have life and have it more abundantly. And in the story of Jesus, of course, we have him walking around Galilee, healing people, rescuing people from their desperation, whether it's leprosy or blindness or what we would call in modern world mental illness, and what they called possession by evil spirits. And even the rescue from the harshness of nature, where Jesus calms the storm. They are stories, but they are of incredible blessing, and it is nothing short of the miracle in the hand of God that we should have such illustrations to teach us. I don't wish to worship the stories, but the understanding of goodness and purity and rescue that's behind the incredible motivation of the heroes of these stories to rescue mankind. In short, whether you're a Christian or whether a Buddhist or Hindu or anything else, or even a sincere humanist or scientist, striving for the goodness of all, it's because of the, in a sense, vision of the divine, the perfect, the good, compared to the evil that we dare not look at in this world. This experience, this lesson here, it's what's driving us all into a heaven of the goodness and loveliness of God as our Heavenly Father. Let me pause. So with this awareness of how man has sought to understand the dilemma, the contrasts in this world of the good that he feels should be normal and the bad that he sees every time he opens his eyes for those creatures so much less fortunate than himself. He forms a religion, a view, that desperately tries to cope with such. You may seek it out in a Buddhist way or a Hindu way or a Christian way. But it's the same astonishing motivation that he has, that things be wonderful instead of awful. What an incredibly wonderful achievement. Do you see we are being fashioned and built for the most noble purposing that you could imagine? We are indeed being fashioned as gods that are at present in childish form of wrestling with this contrast, that this world of experience that we seem to be in is fashioning us into the most noble of beings, imaginable and beyond such noble imagination. We may personify it in human form as the Buddha, or in divine form as Jesus, the child of God. Whatever. It's the same type of experience that we're going through in living here as people, in the age that and cultures that we find ourselves in. So we do not despise the heroic attempts of each life form that we meet, that strives for what it understands to be good compared to what it would fear of evil, bad. It's an astonishing place. And I don't wish you to worship your respective religions and their guidance, their literature and their heroes, but to see the great spiritual reality behind it. In the human form of a great parent lovingly nurturing his children to be wonderful, even beyond his own comprehension. For that's what he seeks for himself, and therefore, of course, for his children too. So whether it's the Christian Heavenly Father or the Buddhist noble king, it's the same story of one that loves you most earnestly, bringing you up to be well, incredibly privileged as they are. as adults in their world, be it the glory of enlightenment that the Buddha is conceiving of, or the glory of heaven that Jesus is considering in the literature. So don't worship the story or the storyteller or the hero of the story. For the hero in both cases is in the form of the parent that unquestionably purposes to do the best they can to protect their child and bring them to a glorious adult life. So in a Christian type of way we would say, thank you, Heavenly Dad, according to the Jesus story. Or in the case of Buddhism, they would give thanks to, in a pure way, the teaching and those that have kept and administered the teaching for the benefit of us all. But it's the same dilemma and motivation. And that is why we find in any walk of life, whether it's in high religion or low secularity, or what we have deemed to be the purity of the scientific mind, rationality, we still find wonderful people dedicated to the good of others. And we are blessed by the stories they give us of the reality that inspires us to do all we can to not just make things better, but become better ourselves as a consequence. We are the zenith in our world of a force most wonderful, divinity itself, that we may or may not have personified as God, but ever is our hope and joy and life itself. I am come that you might have life and have it more abundantly. Life eternal. Bless you. And you are blessed. And I, in my understanding and culture, would say, thank you, Heavenly Dad.